Welcome to Sasquatch and Sourdough, the podcast where we embark on a journey into the depths of the unknown.
The mystery of life.
Weaving together threads of ancient scripture.
What do you mean, biblical?
Tales of high strangeness.
Tell them about the Twinkie.
Whether you're a seeker of truth,
We believe it's the heart of the house.
or simply hungry for a good story,
What about the Twinkie?
Sasquatch and Sourdough invites you to join us on a journey of discovery, wonder, and deliciousness.
They feel your methods, your theories are...
Spooky.
So grab your backpack, sharpen your senses,
Do you think I'm spooky?
and prepare to explore the sacred mysteries of our highly strange world like never before.
And that is the whole problem with aliens.
Well, welcome back to Sasquatch and Sourdough. I am your host, Christina, and tonight I have on the podcast illustrator, author, paranormal investigator, and host of Strange Familiars podcast, Timothy Renner. Welcome, Tim.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I am a huge fan. Crystal and I think I've told you like 17 times already. Our audience has probably just heard everything from all of your books because we quote you at least once an episode.
Well, thank you. That's
Yeah.
very flattering. Thank you so much. And Sasquatch and sourdough are two things I love very much. So
Oh, okay. Well, we came to the right place.
yeah, there you go.
So you have a new book out that is just awesome because I feel like you kind of picked a subject of folks that don't really have a lot of representation. It's called I Have Never Minded the Loneliness, Hermits and Their Stories. I'm holding it up. Go buy this book. It's awesome. I definitely have one favorite, but I wanted to ask you, like, so is it just digging into folklore really that kind of, you collect these stories? Like, what is the heart behind it?
Well, it sort of happened by accident, and my wife bought me a photograph of a hermit. At the time, I was writing Bigfoot in Pennsylvania and the Bigfoot West Coast Wildman books, which are the sort of the historical Bigfoot, filled with old newspaper articles of what I feel are stories about Bigfoot. They didn't call him Bigfoot back in the day. They called him Wildman. And she put this photo on my desk. She said, yeah, it looks like a wild man. You'll like him. And oh, that's neat. And then it immediately got lost under a pile of papers. And about 3 months later, it kind of shuffled to the top, as I'm working on things. And I actually had a few minutes that day. And I said, I'm going to look this guy up. And it was Billy Woodruff, Colebrook River, Connecticut. He's the first hermit in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked him up and immediately like these great stories started coming up. This guy is super interesting. So did a story about him on Strange Familiars. And I didn't know if people were going to like it. I'm like, well, let me try this. He seems interesting to me. And people really liked it. So we did more hermits and I collected more photos. I started collecting photos of hermits. And then after a while, I said, well, I guess I'll write a book on hermits.
It's just so cool. It's like, I always think of hermits and then they just remind me of like John Muir and like the whole thing that, he was kind of going for and just being out in the wilderness. Like you're capturing something that I think is so lost. When you retell these stories, I mean, obviously it's part of folklore and history, but so many great stories come from the woods.
Well, I'm interested in I suppose, liminal things and liminal people. And I find it very interesting that these people would kind of go off away from society. And yet I was able to find, so much information on so many of these folks because they were unique, because they didn't just do what everyone else did. It's the people who stayed in line and did all the normal things, the equivalent of, I don't want to insult anybody, but anyway, the people that did, everything they were supposed to do,
Yeah.
a lot of them, we've lost their story. We'll never know anything about them, But these folks who, kind of the weirdos that went off on their own I was able to find a lot of information about them because people were interested. Every town had a newspaper, and like back then, that was it. Like every town, every little town, they even had a newspaper, and they were looking for human interest stories. And almost every town had a weird guy that lived in the woods, on the side of the mountain or whatever.
Exactly.
So eventually they'll get around to writing about them. So
yeah, that's kind of like one of my favorite. When I'm doing research, I just go right back into all the old newspaper archives. I mean, there's just such a ton of amazing stories that you're right, like could be forgotten to history.
Yeah, that's the problem. Because whenever you're researching, you're going to find like 4 other things that are interesting along the way. You're going to get squirreled by them. So, which is sometimes good. Sometimes it opens up new doors to other research, but sometimes it's just like a complete distraction. It's like,
Yeah. How did you get started with all of this? Have you always had like an interest in the paranormal and, like you said, like liminal spaces, all the weird stuff?
Yeah. Although I wouldn't have called it that as a kid. To me, it was just cool stuff.
Yeah.
I grew up in northern Baltimore County on a farm.
Oh, which part?
Upperco.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Nice. I grew up on Dark Hollow Road, apparently, appropriately rather.
Mm-hmm.
And very early in life became interested in ghosts and not just Scooby-Doo and stuff like that, but when someone told me like, oh, there's a ghost story about the up the road at the corner up there, or down by the mill, I was hooked. Like, oh wait, because these are real, quote unquote real things, and always wanted to go there and so forth. So, I was interested in the paranormal and folklore. As a kid, I wouldn't have called it that. To me, it was just cool stuff,
Yeah.
And then the Bigfoot stuff came along, the In Search of and Legend of Boggy Creek and all that, 1970s pop culture Bigfoot stuff. I was a kid, during all that, and it was just fantastic, and got hooked on Bigfoot, and so it's always been there for me.
Patty, what's your take on Patty?
It's hard to deter. I'm right on the fence. I'm literally right on the fence and leaning towards not a real creature at this point.
Yeah. I'm kind of in the same camp. But, as much as I want to believe it, it just looks so fake.
We'll see.
I know.
I've heard some things which I really can't comment on, that make me go, yeah, I don't know about that. So, we may never know, but we'll see. It's certainly interesting that Patterson drew in his book, on Bigfoot, a female Bigfoot with hairy breasts.
Mm-hmm.
Walking in the same way before he filmed that.
Yeah.
That's a little strange to me,
That was the red flag for me too.
Yeah. I think that would be the only, assuming Bigfoot's a primate, that would be the only primate with hairy breasts, Yeah. So who knows?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was just, and I was thinking about that like the other day, is that exactly, like, it just seems too coincidental that just right there, ready.
Yeah.
Nobody else seems to be able to capture, you get lots of blurry video, blurry pictures, all that sort of stuff. And this one just kind of, I don't know. I finally came out and said it too, because I was like, I'm not lying to my audience. I don't know. This is sketchy.
Yeah, it's you will get a lot of vitriol from the flesh and blood. What do they even have the costume technology at the time? Okay. All right, and that's fine. And I kind of love that that it's kind of the curiosity thing. I mean, and Where the Footprints End, I kind of go over it as the ultimate like question mark, because even the guy who claims he was the guy in the suit can't produce a suit. So it's so perfect. They can't produce the original film. They don't yet. Tons of people claim, I know where it is. Well, okay, produce it. They never do.
Right.
So the whole thing's interesting in that way. It's very paranormal in the way that it expresses itself, whether it's a real creature or not.
I kind of fall in line, I think, with more of that, the paranormal camp of Bigfoot, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, especially where we are, I'm sorry, flesh and blood folks, but there's not a breeding population in York County. I get calls every year about Bigfoot, all times a year. There's not a breeding population here. There's no wilderness here. We have woods, but wilderness, untouched land. There's no wilderness. And they would make such a huge impact. Their diet alone would make such a huge impact on the environment, because they don't cook their food. They need calories.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the argument I think that finally pushed me completely away from the flesh and blood thing is when I read that if you took a human brain and put it in a mountain gorilla, they literally wouldn't have enough time in the day to forage food to power that brain.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
So if we're talking about a creature that's way bigger than the mountain gorilla and, so, you know, presumably very intelligent, according to all reports, we can assume they're very intelligent, they would need to power that brain with an incredible amount of calories.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't cook their food. You know, we'd see fires all over the forest, so they cook their food. And even people report them just eating, you know, raw. So if you're not processing your food, you have to be eating constantly. Constantly. And it's just, they would make a huge impact on the environment doing that. You know, they'd be eating farm animals and everything else. We'd know they were there if there was a breeding population.
Oh, definitely. And especially, it's funny because I'm always like, when I go on shows, I'm like, yeah, I'm from Maryland, so I don't have any Bigfoot encounter experience at all. Like, we just don't have, I don't think that there's, you know, exactly like a roaming population.
There's some great encounters in Harford County and stuff, just, you know.
Oh, yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, yeah, breeding population.
Definitely.
Yeah, Maryland.
Yeah, Harford County for sure. I mean, where we are, we're in kind of, I guess, like south. I'm on like the city line of Baltimore City and Baltimore County. So we have some good, you know, green spaces and great woods for sure, where there's definitely weird stuff going on, but nothing that looks like, I mean, we get some structures, stuff like that, but the one place that I actually go and hike often, it almost seems like there's people just living in the woods. Like, it almost gets more of a hermit vibe because I have people that are like making natural chairs out of like what, you know, like logs and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and, like, campfire stuff, and some structures that seem to be more man-made,
like bushcraft kind of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, it's still cool because, I mean, somebody made these beautiful chairs just out of, I guess, whatever like wood they found from trees, like locally. It's really neat. And it just reminds me so much of, like, I don't know, it's kind of hermit.
Well, it could be. I mean, it's, you know, we've come across homeless camps in the woods before.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's you know, and you hope they're nice, you know. They've not been, you could tell they were living there, but there were no people there when we came across them. So I've always wondered, like, I wonder if they were there, what, you know, what would that encounter be like?
Exactly. So can you tell me your favorite, I guess out of the entire book, really, what's your favorite story? Because I know I have one that just really stuck out to me.
My favorite, so in a way, William Woodruff, because he's the first, will sort of always have a place in my heart just because he's the first. But overall, John Stink has become my favorite. He was they called him the living ghost. So he was an Osage Indian. And I always have to preface this whenever I talk about him. My research comes from white newspapers reporting at the time, so early 1900s. I don't know how accurate this represents actual Osage beliefs on death and everything else. So,
that's fair.
Yeah. So I always like to say that. But according to the newspapers, John Stink died as many as 3 times and came back to life. And when he came back to life, he came to, you know, back to his people, and they said, no, the dead are supposed to stay dead. And they kind of outcast him, and they renamed him John Stink. His native name was Hotamoi. So they renamed him John Stink. He is a hermit. He lives outside. You know, I have plenty of photos of him in tents and on the streets of Pawhuska, Oklahoma. He's has, you know, adopts these dogs, these wild dogs, and, you know, they become his pets. Super interesting story. At some point, there's a rabies outbreak in Pawhuska, and there's a note in the newspaper that all dogs have to be muzzled except for John Stink's dogs. So everybody knew John Stink, and they knew, you know, his dogs were well trained, and they were like, except for his, all dogs have to be muzzled. And then shortly after that, I find this other article about a marshal in town who shot all his dogs and said, oh, I thought they were attacking him, which everybody knew who he was. They literally made an exception for him in the law. I do not believe that for a second. I think the guy was just a jerk or something, you know? So he walks out of town and says, I'll never come to Pawhuska again. And he, to my knowledge, he kept to that except for once. I found one instance of him going back to town, but for for all intents and purposes, he stayed away for the rest of his life. In the early 1900s, the on Osage land, there's an oil strike, and they become per capita one of the richest peoples in the world, including John Stink. It's shared evenly among all the people. So here's a guy who could have built a mansion, but he chooses to live. He just wants to live, outside.
Yeah.
In fact, they built him a house at one point, and he said, "Nah, it makes me sick to live in a house. I'm going to live outside." So he's got all this money. He ends up buying some land. Very imposing looking guy. He's like over 6 feet tall. He's usually got a cigar hanging out of his mouth and a knife on his hip. He looks very imposing in the photos, but super nice guy. He ends up giving $1,000 to, I think, every church in Paul Huska donation. He sends Osage girls to private school, just pays their tuition outright. He donates, I think he's almost solely responsible for, at the time, for the American Legion hut there. He donated a bunch of money to that. So, very caring person and giving person. And he eventually dies. He falls in his 70s. He falls off a ladder and breaks his leg, and then ends up getting pneumonia and dies once and for all. And the interesting thing is, to my knowledge, there's no ghost stories about John Stink, but there are ghost stories about his dogs, where people say
really?
you can still see his or hear his dogs howling outside of town and so forth. But
that's cool.
He became my favorite. It's just such an interesting story. I collected, I think, some 14 different ways they said he died. They can't agree on how he died. Some had it pneumonia, some had it in a battle with another tribe, some had it tuberculosis, all kinds of different things. So who knows how much of that is legend and how much is truth, but it's whatever it was, it just really, to me, it's like such a cool story.
It really is. And I guess there's probably just a good amount of legend that kind of, weaves into truth with things like that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So who's your favorite? You said you had a favorite.
Oh, I do. I'm all set. I'm really excited about this. Atwell Martin. I just love the idea. Yeah.
The guy who killed Paul Bunyan.
That he killed Paul Bunyan.
Yeah.
Well, I love the story because, it's kind of romantic. He fell in love, with a woman, and then that was kind of part of why he, I guess I never want to think of them as like isolating, but, wanted to just kind of like be alone. And then there's just these two giant legends of him and Paul Bunyan.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just really,
I like
that was a good one.
The hunting story where he kills, I don't know how many things with one bullet. So yeah, they quite a tall tale guy.
Yeah. And then they just like start fighting. They get along and they're friends, and then they fight, and then he just kills Paul Bunyan.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to be a legend, why not kill another legend?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved that one. That was a good one. But I like the idea of, it kind of being a little bit romantic too, like lost the love of your life, and then I'm just going to kind of take to the woods.
Yeah, which is kind of a trope, and I realized like towards the end of the book how many times I had to address that as a trope with these books. So sometimes it was true. Sometimes it was absolutely true. And William Woodruff, like I said, the first fellow I talked about, we really don't know if it's true or not in his case, because like that's what the newspapers claimed. He didn't do a lot of talking, so he never really told his own story. Other people told his story, but even like there was a town historian for Colebrook River, Connecticut, which is now underwater. It's one of those towns they flooded to make a reservoir, and a woman wrote the history of it in the 1950s. She was quite old in the 1950s, and it was all her recollections. It wasn't like a hard history of it. And some of the stuff she said just didn't check out, like timeline wise. Like she was talking about photos and stuff. Like, well, that's wrong because that kind of photo wasn't around at that time, things like that. So, but it's memory, people's memory is fallible for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. What was the saddest case I think that you came about, like when you're writing the book?
Let me think on that. I mean, because some of them are sad in different ways, There's somebody like William Woodruff, who kind of takes this vow of silence, supposedly lost the love of his life. And he did seem to have at least a practical vow of silence, unless he just didn't like talking to people. Because the story went, this woman he fell in love with, her favorite flower was hollyhocks. And he grew them all around his cabin. And again, there are newspaper articles about this where he was on the road between Colebrook River and Winsted, Connecticut. And when people would pass by, he would just silently, he wouldn't say a word to them, hand them these hollyhock flowers. There's, every year there'd be articles about him, like, okay, and William Woodruff's out handing out, hollyhock flowers again. So if it's true, I mean, how sad is that? And then
I know.
Supposedly he had a daguerre-type photo of her that he kept with him at all times. And, one of the stories of the fire that burned his place down has him sitting in the flames holding that photo. I think there's another version of it where he was laying in bed smoking and his beard and clothes caught on fire from a spark. I think that's probably more accurate, but the romantic story is pretty amazing. Him setting his cabin ablaze and just, finally, it's the end now.
Yeah, I know. Oh, that is really sweet. Just handing out hollyhocks.
Yeah. Yeah.
How can you not love that if you're just part of a village or, a town, and then just here he is handing out flowers.
A couple of years back, I went up to New England to try to find where his cabin was. I did not locate it then, although I know where it is now. I'm going to go back, but I visited his grave and I planted hollyhocks on his grave. So.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know if they're still there or not, but I planted it.
I love that. That's just showing homage and respect, I think. We're kind of have a responsibility, I guess, of that. When you're retelling stories, you really kind of have to be gentle and generous.
And that's what, this book took 3 years to write. It's so different than, and I'll get back to writing paranormal books and Bigfoot books, I no doubt. I have plenty of plans for that, but the research for that is very much like something like Where the Footprints End.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm writing a chapter on Bigfoot and women in white spirits, I can look for those stories and see how they fit in and kind of tell that story that way. With this, these were real people that lived. Mm-hmm. They were born on a specific date. They died on a specific date. They lived in a specific place. And the hardest thing about it is finding or figuring out when I've got all the information. Like, when do I have everything? Because find newspaper articles, some of them stuff in books. You contact historical societies for these different places. And eventually you kind of have to say, well, I guess I got everything. And I'm sure I'm going to dig up more information, or someone else will, on some of these people. And I'll be like, oh man, that should be in the book. But eventually you have to pull the trigger and say, well, it's done, both for each individual hermit and the book as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really just tend to look at your books in terms of just good reference and research material. I mean, in my own personal, research and storytelling that I do, I always end up going back. So I'm sure this will be like a first sort of stepping stone for somebody's research. So very well done.
Yeah, I hope so. And that's, I think that's the hope for everybody who does this kind of research. You try to kick some doors down, and then hopefully somebody comes behind you and finds other doors to kick down based on ones you've kicked down.
Exactly. Well, another book that you wrote that we also talk about, so The Seventh Gate. Beyond this, you kind of get into Hex Hollow, and like I said, we did a little bit of research. That was like our first, real case. But then I've never heard of Toad Road before this book. Can you tell kind of how you stumbled across that place? I mean, I don't want to give away too much. I'd rather hear it in your own words, but
the book's been out for a while, so I can spoiler alert for anybody. But no, when I first moved up here to Pennsylvania, of course, the first thing I did is where's the spooky stuff,
Mm-hmm.
And one of the stories I was told was about the 7 gates of hell. But the people who told me, who had, been here far longer than me, said that they were one of two places. They were in Prospect Hill Cemetery in York City, or they were in Hex Hollow.
Mm-hmm.
No, at no time ever were they associated with Toad Road at that point. But my wife said, "Oh yeah, there's something, Toad Road," and I was like, "Well, what's the legend there?" And she said, "Oh, the only thing I ever heard was don't look behind you on Toad Road." It's like, okay, that sounds spooky, but And at the time, I imagined like, what is there supposed to be like some kind of killer that chases you down the road or something? I didn't put it together. Time goes on, and early internet days, I'm in this email group. Remember email groups? I don't know if you remember email groups. It was for a sort of legend tripping around the area, and there was one group in there who, I think they were young folks. Every weekend they'd go off and they explore a different legend, and they'd come back on Monday and they'd be like, "We figured it out. We know the." So I remember they went to Hex Hollow and they're like, "We found Raymar's house." This is before Weird USA, Weird Pennsylvania, all that stuff. And they print a picture, or they put up a picture in the email group of this house that was built in like the 60s or 70s. I'm like, no, that's not his house. I'm sorry. You're wrong. So they weren't great researchers. So they didn't let anything get in the way of a good story, I guess. One weekend they come back and they're like, we found the story of the 7 gates of hell. And they literally told this story about a burning insane asylum on Toad Road. And, the inmates were, escaped during the fire, and the townspeople were so afraid they killed them in the woods, and all this crazy stuff. And there's 7 gates to keep people away from the ruins of this insane asylum. First thing I did is go to a map. My father-in-law has old maps of the area, and look on that. And there was never any structure that could have been an insane asylum or anything like it out there, nor would they put anything out there like that. But, hey, I'm doing my due diligence. I came back and was like, nope, never any structure like that out there. Sorry. And there's never a date tied to the story, by the way. So they usually be like in the late 1800s is what people always. You notice somebody doesn't know something though. Like, it was in the late 1800s. Our theory on that, my wife and I, by the way, is like that's when people start having photos. That's why most ghosts are Victorian, because that's the first time we know what people really look like.
Exactly. Yeah.
So anyway, it's like, so I was like, well, when was this supposed to be there? Well, no, we don't know that. Well, then when I said there was never an insane asylum out there, they immediately changed it. It's like, oh no, it was a mad doctor who kept patients in his house, and his house burnt down.
Oh,
and
of course.
Same story, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, right.
Well, unfortunately for him, there was a doctor who lived at the end of what they call Toad Road. Drawing a blank on his name. But in any case, he was a cardiologist.
Yeah.
And there was never an insane asylum in York County. There were things they called asylums and sanitariums. But back in the day, that's what they called any hospital. Like, there was a sanitarium that was in Hellam, the area where this is, not on Toad Road.
Mm-hmm.
But it was an old folks' home. But they called it a sanitarium. So people, see? And that did burn down, actually. Nobody was killed. No one killed the patients as they left. Right. It was just an old folks' home.
There's no tragedy.
Yeah. The most exciting thing that happened is some kids, didn't go back to school because they wanted to watch it burn. One afternoon. I think that was in the 1950s or something. But in any case, because it's Hellam is the township, I think because of that old folks home that did burn down, that was called a sanitarium, and for a number of other reasons, I think this story sticks. There's enough to it that people go, and there was a gate up there that people remember at that doctor's house, actually. So there's enough to it where people are like, well, there was a gate, and I remember my parents telling me they went there and had spooky stuff happen, so this story must be true. Well, it's not true. And Weird USA contacted me before they ever published the book. They did a magazine called Weird New Jersey that was just like a fanzine. It was like a zine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I didn't know this was going to be a major publication, by the way, when they asked me to do this. And they said, would you write, about Hex Hollow? I said, sure. And they said, would you take photos for that and for Toad Road? And I said, yes, but please let me proofread what you print on Toad Road before you do it, because there's a lot of nonsense out there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the book comes out, and it looks like they have copied and pasted that story that those kids wrote, word for word, unless one of the kids submitted it, I don't know, about the insane asylum and the mad doctor and all this stuff. And that becomes the story. So now it's in print. So people are like, that's the story. And it's on the internet. So that's the story. So I have to fix this, I think, in my head, and I thought it was going to be a magazine article. I thought originally, I didn't know it was going to turn into a book. So then I started doing research and talking to people who had real experiences out there, because people do have real strange experiences out there, me included. But a lot of the stuff they're talking about doesn't sound like any kind of ghost. It doesn't sound, I mean, there were a couple of ghost stories, but a lot of it sounds like cryptid stuff, screams in the woods, being paced in the woods, things like that. And I'm like,
that's the main thing that like stuck out with me is the screaming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I come across this one story of this guy. It was printed in the newspaper, and it said he was attacked by a green hairy monster.
What?
I think it was 1974. And there's, they said, and the police went out there to check, and they found no monster or something. It's a very short article. So, okay, we have this, monster attack, and these people, like other people, were describing like weird things, like in the woods there and so forth. So I'm like, well, yeah, none of this sounds like insane asylum stuff. And I went out and hiked the place and found, there's one gate at the end of the road.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no more gates. And when I would report this stuff, I said, well, there's no gates back there. People, well, it's the fallen trees. They act as gates. I'm like, come on. Like, first of all, there's more than 7 fallen trees. So come out there with me and show me which are the 7. And, the story goes, you can't get past the 7th. I walked the whole thing, end to end many times. So, eventually I start looking into Pennsylvania folklore, and the one thing that hits me, and it was like this immediate, like I would say in my writing, I always kind of look for the story in anything. It's easy to throw a bunch of facts down, but I'm trying to find a story, and this is when it became a story for me. There's a creature in Pennsylvania folklore they call the hide behind. Mm-hmm. And they said, only the bravest should be the last in line when going through the woods in Pennsylvania, because only the bravest could be relied on to never look behind them. And it hit me the first thing I heard about Toad Road, don't look behind you. And that's where it all clicked. I was like, that's it. That's it. So my second book is on Toad Road is called Don't Look Behind You. But I think that's it. I think other things were going on there. I think this insane asylum story got literally just pasted over top of it. I say it's like a cheap jump scare in a horror movie. Insane asylum burned. But the real stuff is neat, and it's a little more subtle, and it's underneath. I also figured out, I don't even know who built Toad Road at this point. I figured that out. That's for the future, because the newspapers up here, by the way, they used to always say, no one knows the story of Toad Road. And I'm just like, I know the story. I know, no one knows the real story. No, I do. I actually know who built it. I know the whole story. I know what it was called before, but it was a towpath. It goes along the Cador's Creek, and that was navigable water. And it was used to haul things from York out to the Susquehanna River. And they built a towpath because it's not easy. Some of these barges had to be towed through certain parts of the creek. So there it was, towpath, tow road. Whispering down the line becomes Toad Road over time. So
that makes sense.
Yeah. So like they would say, well, it's because that doctor kept a lot of toad statues. I even went back. No. I found pictures of the doctor's house. There's no toad statues around his house. Nothing like that. It's it's a tow road. It's a towpath. I'm 1,000% convinced of that. So
those stories like just become legends so quickly, and I think you're right, because it is like the jump scare. It's just so much easier, I guess, and we want to be scared, so we want to take for face value whatever somebody came up with, even if it's not correct. So that's what I think it's so important to go back and research these things to see the origin story and if it even exists, because that stuff is so easy to just kind of, then you get into like urban legend territory.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Which
Mhm.
is, I mean, a lot of people will ask me why, how can I start doing this stuff? And I tell them, well, go to those places.
Yeah.
There's usually a reason why an urban legend is associated with a certain place. And
Yeah.
but dig down and find the truth, or as close to the truth as you can. It's, that a lot of these places, I think when I was in high school, be like, oh, there was a satanic cult met there.
Mhm.
And folklorists have done research on that. It's like, yeah, in the 80s, they would say there was a satanic cult there. But the exact same place, if you go back to the 50s, they said, oh, there were KKK meetings there.
Oh,
It,
interesting.
yeah, so it's like this, whatever's happening culturally at the time, the spooky thing
Right.
becomes the thing that goes on there. But,
That makes
these
sense.
places
Yeah.
also have ghost stories.
So what was your you said do you have a couple like accounts from yourself personally from Toad Road?
Yeah. Yeah. So early days of it might have been before I started the podcast. I went out there one week and I was with my buddy, and I'm very obsessive in some ways. And I like to hike the whole thing end to end at least once a year. It's kind of like
Mhm.
a thing I do. And for whatever reason that day, we went maybe a little more than halfway. And he's like, he just didn't want to go any further. Not for any spooky reason. I don't know if he was tired, he had an appointment or something. But for
Mhm.
whatever reason, we turned around. And on the way back, two things happened. One, we walked through what I want to call a wall of stink, about maybe 2-3 feet wide across the trail. And you could walk into this and smell just the nastiest, like that quote unquote Bigfoot smell, BO
Mhm.
and dead stuff, it smelled like, and literally walk out of it on the other side and not smell it, turn around, walk back into it, you'd smell it again, walk through it to the other side. So you only smelled it in this one little place on the trail. Very strange.
Hmm.
And then as we go out further, right in the middle of the trail, like literally in the middle of the trail, perfectly sat there, was a raccoon skull.
Oh, wow.
Now, I have been collecting skulls since I'm a little kid. I remember my father gave me, I think the first one he gave me was a raccoon skull. So here, you want that? And I was, I'm an artist. I'd like to draw this stuff. And I've always liked spooky stuff. So I was like, heck yeah. So that's what that got me started. And I was probably 8 or 10 when he gave me that. And I've just
Mhm.
always collected skulls when I found them, to the point where I'm very tuned to that color in the woods. You'll see me, like, if I even a leaf of that color, I'll like look over real quick, and try to, it's a skull, I'm very
Mhm.
focused on them. So could I have stepped over this skull on the way in and not seen it? Yes, it's possible. It's very unlikely, honestly, very unlikely that I would, a perfectly clean raccoon skull in the middle of the trail that I just step over and two of us step over. Very unlikely. So I picked that up. Wow, Skull and Toad Road, isn't that cool? In my packet goes, off we go. Made plans to hike there the following week. This was, I think, probably mid-March or something when we did that. In the following week, he couldn't do it. Week after that, he couldn't do it. And I think I went that then by myself. I was like, well, I think it was just a week in between. It might have been 2 weeks, but in any case, so I'm going out by myself. Forget it. I need
Mhm.
to hike the whole thing. My obsessiveness is,
It's like your
yeah,
ritual.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, so I can't wait for you. So I'll go up by myself. No problem. So I went out there. I get on the trail. I'm about, it's an out and back hike. It's not a loop, you know,
Okay. Is it like how many miles in would you say, like, to the end?
2 or 3, maybe. I
Okay.
think the stuff online says it's like 9 miles. You will
Right.
feel like you've hiked 9 miles because it's not an easy hike and you're climbing over fallen trees and so forth.
Mhm.
When this was a road, it was at best a gravel road, probably a dirt road in places. It was never like a super nice road. It was flooded out by Hurricane Agnes, so that's 72, and just they
Mhm.
never reopened it again. So
Okay.
everything, there's a couple places where it still looks like a road, but for the most part, you're on like a little path. The road itself is pretty much gone. So I go out again. I get to the place on the trail about where I saw that found that raccoon skull. Not sure if it was the exact same place, but it was about there. And I hear something up ahead of me, just like something big moving. And I look and I saw something. I can only tell you it was bigger than things in South Central Pennsylvania should be.
Mm-hmm.
And I was headed south, and it was headed south very quickly and I just heard the one initial like snap of something. I never heard anything else. It just quietly and quickly just shot off. And my first thought, having hiked in New England and seen a moose, was that immediately my first thought was, that's a moose? And then, like, of course not. There's no moose here. Somebody else said, "Oh, it could have been a bull elk that came down from one of the other." Oh, okay, but highly doubtful.
That was my thought.
That's
elk,
a long way for an elk to go.
Yeah.
If it was, it's still pretty strange that there's an elk out there where we never have elk. But the reason I said it was like a moose is because it didn't run like a deer. It had a strange gait to it. It had a very strange gait to it, but I saw a lot of the back. I'll say that. It was black and gray. And not for bravery. I don't know what came over me. I took off after this thing as fast as I could. Now, at this point, it's a lot warmer. Weeds have grown up, everything. So that's not, at a run. But I'm making my way as fast as I can after this thing. And I get, maybe half mile. I'm going, and I'm stopped in my track by a skull that's impaled on a branch at eye level. It was a deer skull. And it also, recently I was looking at the photos I took that day, and it also had like dried flowers where the third eye would be. Which
really?
I had forgotten about until I was looking at the actual photos recently. I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot about that. Now, once again, could a human have done? Of course, a human could have done that. But this is private property. No one is supposed to be there. I wasn't supposed to be there. People, it's not a pleasant hike. It's nowhere anyone goes for fun. No one should have been there. And they would have had to, come down there, bring a skull with them, or find one, and decide to impale it at eye level, on the it's just, there was a lot. It was a lot. But I'm stopped in my tracks, not out of fear, because I had a lot of people, that's the way Sasquatch marks their hunting grounds and stuff like that. How do you know?
Right.
How do you know? And I didn't get a bad feeling at all. I was amazed. I was stopped in my tracks, so I was like, wow, look at that.
Yeah, that was my question. Do you get like a general sense of like any unease or anything when you're hiking there, or is it just kind of?
It depends on the time. This time, not at all. It was just wonder, really. It was like, wow, look at that. And, for whatever feelings are worth, the feeling I got was, oh, you like that little raccoon skull, did you? Well, here's something for you.
Right.
So I did not, in fact, finish that hike that day because I was too excited. I grabbed that skull, put it in my pack, and was like, wow, and turned around the other way and went. That started for probably about a 2-year period. And I'll say 85%, but it might have been more like 90 or 95%. Whenever I went on paranormal investigations, I found skulls, starting from that point on.
Really?
I was called to, right after that, there was a Bigfoot sighting in northern York County. Guy called me up to his property. He saw 2 creatures across the pond on his property. It was funny because he was like a biker guy, and he wouldn't even go across the pond. He was like, I'm not going over there. I was like, well, show me where they were. He's like, I'm not going over there. So I was like, well,
figure it out, find them.
I said, well, I'll go over there. I said, you tell me where to stop, where they were standing.
Mm-hmm.
So I go around the other side of the pond. He's like, okay, right there. And I was like, all right, I'm going to raise my walking stick. Tell me how tall they were. So he's like, okay, about that tall. So it's like, 8 foot tall. He said there were 2 of them standing there. And as soon as we're done, I look down and there's a perfectly clean deer skull right at my feet, right where he said they were standing. And this goes on. I met a guy over in Michaud Forest. He had 3 different encounters. One where he saw a creature, one where he was screamed at, and one where I think he just heard something. everywhere we stopped, I found a skull that day. And he's like, "What is happening with you?" I'm like, I have no clue. I have no clue. This went even for ghost stuff. We go for places. The funniest one was in Westminster, Maryland. We were doing a story about a guy. I'm trying to remember his name, but this is like back in the 1700s. He ran an iron furnace there. And the legend about him is he would dress up as a ghost and scare his neighbors. So
Yeah.
where some of his lands are sort of like a nature preserve or something where he was, and you can kind of get on them and almost get to his house is private property. What was his house, the furnace master's house, but you can get close to it on these nature preserves. So we were getting as close to it as we could without trespassing, walking in the woods. We're not on any trail. And I bend down and I pick up a plastic Halloween skull just way out in the middle of the woods.
That is so random.
Yeah. And I thought, oh, isn't that funny? I found a skull anyway. It's not a real skull, and somebody did the on the podcast, and somebody's like, well, isn't that appropriate? The guy who dressed up like a ghost, a fake ghost, is you find a fake skull. I was like, oh, look at that. It kind of is.
That's awesome.
But it was to the point where at one point in the pandemic, my daughter doesn't like to hike, but she's like, Dad, I want to find skulls like you do. I'm like, well, you got to come out with me. And there's maybe 2 acres of woods near my house, in this little town I live in. I was like, well, let's go over there and we'll just see what we can see. It won't be a big hike. We'll just go. And we go over there and we're doing the hike and we're not finding anything. I was like, well, who knows? I'll keep looking for you. And then right as we're leaving, right on the log, set there, like it was left for us, perfectly clean fox skull, just sat there. I was like, there you go.
That's amazing.
It happened again and again and again. I had so many skulls where I started having inside and outside skulls. There's just got too many. Like I can't keep all these.
Right.
So it was crazy. Now it seems to have died off. I don't know why. Last summer seemed to be the summer of blue jays. So I kept finding blue jay feathers everywhere. So I don't know if it's been replaced by that. But the skulls, that was a thing. It really was. It was amazing for a long time. And it started there on Toad Road.
Toad Road. I don't know. Well, you said it's not like a place you could go. Like, you gotta be careful? Okay.
A state park, I thought, bought all of it, but I was out there recently and there was big new no trespassing signs. And I don't know whether that's the state park saying they don't want you to go on certain parts of it, or if maybe they reprivatized it. I don't know. So I've been telling people, oh, go ahead, state park owns it, go out there now. But now, it seems like at least parts of it are privatized again. So,
okay.
Yeah. But
that might be a place for Crystal and I to go check out. She loves finding skulls and anything. Her daughter is obsessed with like taxidermy, all of that stuff. Like they went to Texas and she had a blast with all those weird statues.
Another amazing, if you have time for another short story about Toad
absolutely.
Road. It was the day before everything locked down for the pandemic. I was out there with my buddy Chad, who you hear on the podcast a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And we're hiking, and we found a blue mylar balloon, which, if you are familiar with Hellier, that's a thing there. But we started, and I'm so glad this is documented. I'm friends with everyone in Hellier. I did the soundtrack to the season 2, the last episode. I love them. They did not get this from us, and we didn't get it from them. I didn't know what was happening in Hellier 2. Like I was doing the music for it. I didn't know anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
We started finding mylar balloons, and we talked about it on the podcast. This is before Hellier 2 ever came out. You can hear it on Strange Familiar, so this isn't like a post Hellier thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they're finding them at the same time. Tyler in Hellier has this amazing blue mylar balloon find. Well, so this is happening, like neither one of us knows it's happening the other way. They're not paying attention to what I'm doing. I don't know what's happening with them. It just is a thing. And we both start finding them. So we're out there, we're on Toad Road. We find a blue mylar balloon. We're like, hey, look at that blue mylar balloon. 2 steps beyond that, I see a skull. And I said, what? There's a skull there. But it looked weird. I thought it was a deer skull, but it's like, it looked kind of weird. So I pull it out of the ground, and it's a pig skull. And it's got
that's
a bullet
really
hole.
strange.
bullet hole right there. There are no pig farms around there. We do not have wild pigs, although I may have seen one recently, but we don't have a big population of wild pigs anyway. But it hits me as I pick this up. I'm like, that's a pig skull. And then I remember this article, and I never published it. I found it, and I didn't publish it in either of my books on Twitter because I was like, kind of like, I don't know if this fits or not. It's a story about a young man who was slaughtering pigs. And they said he was near Trout Run, which is exactly where we were, with a .22 pistol. And they had been slaughtering pigs. He had put the pistol in his shirt pocket. It fell out, and it shot him above the heart.
Oh my gosh.
Tragic story. But I never published it anywhere. And I picked this pig skull up, and I immediately, like, I'm stunned, and I'm saying, like, I can barely talk. I'm like, Chad. And I explain this story. Now, is it that skull? I don't know, but what are the chances? Like,
Right,
exactly. 2 steps after I blew my lighter balloon, what are the chances of that? And it means nothing to anybody but me. This article, probably no one has read it since, I think it was in like 1909 or something. Probably no one has read this article since that time except me. I never published it. And I'm just like, what the heck is this? I'm blown away by it. We go up, and we do the hike, and we're coming back, and we're kind of in the same area. And Chad says, hey, look at this. Bends down and picks up another pig skull.
What?
Yeah. So they were obviously slaughtering pigs there. Like, so was it from that incident? I don't know, but it's certainly, it meant so much to me, and then pandemic, everything shuts down the following day. It was a very, very strange thing, but that was one of the most stunning things to me, even more than that impaled skull, that pig skull, just because I was like, no one knows this story but me. And I'm just like stunned. I'm like, what? It was pretty cool.
That's awesome. Do you ever like, I'm a big, I always wonder why, I don't believe in coincidences, like for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I always want to know why, like what does this mean? What is it? Are you trying to say something? Not that it's something that's trying to communicate, but have you ever kind of gotten any sort of vibe of what it might have been?
I think, for lack of a better word, I just call it all the other. Ghost, Bigfoot, all of that. It's just the other. And I think the other wants to have interchange with us. And it uses symbolism a lot. It uses synchronicity a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
And that's the way it tends to communicate. So I think often it's only just recognizing, like, hey, I see you, Sometimes I take it as like, oh, you're on the right path. But that path usually just means like more questions and more paranormal stuff. But for me, that's the right path. But yeah, so I just think it's way of communicating. And sometimes it can be very strange and almost scary the way it communicates. It's a very, very long story, but a series of things that happen in Hex Hollow that ends with a rabid raccoon attack.
Mm-hmm.
And I always felt that I, folklorically, I had done something wrong. I had asked for a gift. So I asked for a skull. This is during all that. I was gifting. I had left some alcohol. I asked for a skull. I walked a short distance, went into a place in the park I'd never been in, which is unusual because I've been hiking that park since I moved up here, and found a groundhog head that it was freshly decapitated.
Ugh.
And yeah, and I went, ew, so I don't collect. I don't like gore. I don't like, and that's not me. It's got to be a nice sun-bleached skull for me to take home. I don't want any gore. Nothing like that. Yeah. So I'm like, ugh, and I back away from this thing. But I'm realizing at the time, I asked for a skull. It gave me a skull. It's just covered in meat,
Right.
And it was definitely a fresh kill, absolutely fresh. There was like fur, and it was just the head, and the jawbone was separate, or the jaw. It wasn't a bone. And it really freaked me out, but I didn't take it. And I read later that's a huge no-no in folklore to ask for something if you're given it. First of all, you're not supposed to ask in general. But if you're asked and you're given something and you don't take it, that's a big offense. Time goes on, a couple visits later, I'm there and I'm attacked by this rabid raccoon. And I always felt that it was, like it was related to that. I really felt like I got the series of synchronicities that went with that too. That just creeped me out. And
Oh, for sure.
I stopped hiking there for a while just because I was like, the whole thing was just, dark. That was a very,
Yeah.
very dark thing. And I was like ready to hike there alone again. And I started hiking alone. The first or second time I hiked there alone, I went on a completely different trail. And it's a place where I had found, oddly enough, stones like wedged into trees. And I wanted to see if they were still there. They weren't. But I said, well, let me replace them. I'll just put the stones back where they were. So I put a couple stones in, as best as I could remember, in the trees where they were. And I immediately hear a wood knock from the direction I had come from. So I didn't want to go back that way. So I was like, well, I'll loop around and go this other way. And I go about 20 or 30 steps down the trail, and there's a dead cat laid out. Looked like it just fell over dead. No predation. It wasn't a coyote kill. It looked like it just fell over dead perfectly in the middle of the trail, right across the trail. And I was like, oh, here we go again, right? Like, what is this? And I found it so disturbing. But one of my closest advisors is a Franciscan friar who's on Straight Familiars a lot, Brother Richard.
Oh, I love him. Those are the best episodes.
Yeah. He's amazing source for this kind of stuff. And so I immediately go to Brother Richard. I'm like, what is this? And he said, and he's very good with this stuff. And he said, no, he says, it's just the other. It's like, they don't understand. They speak a different language. And it wasn't dark to them. Like, you read it as very dark. To them, it was like, hey, let's start this game again. Let's start playing these games again.
Interesting.
And that really helped me settle with it. And I was like, okay. And I do think that's the case. I think sometimes it doesn't realize, like, the language it's using, quote unquote language, to us is like weird and scary. But to it, it's just like, wants that interchange. It wants that, that back and forth.
Yeah. I have to admit, I had a more of a darker sort of, paranormal encounters and things like that. And then I came to faith in 2019. And ever since then, I've been like a little bit careful. Like, I don't want to go back into getting the attention of dark things.
Yeah.
So I'm always a little bit, I guess, I don't want to say superstitious, but I'm always kind of like a little bit weary. And I had this kind of experience with Hex Hollow because when we were looking into it, and especially when I started like looking into Long Lost Friend, like I actually found a copy of it online and started reading it. And I couldn't really, I think that's part of the reason that I never released that episode, because at that time in my like young like walk with the Lord, I was really, I guess, like religious. Like, there's a lot of religiosity. And I don't think that I would have been able to tell that story the way that it was supposed to be told in my mindset then. But it's crazy because when you brought up the black cat, there's a place that I hike, or a cat. It reminded me of this. There's a place I hike, and I do a lot of prayer hiking and prayer walking. And I was kind of feeling like, I want to lose this superstition. I want to be able to tell stories and get into folklore and really, just honor it without feeling like I'm, I don't know, reading too into it for like the wrong reasons. So I was praying and I was like, well, I want this taken off of my heart. I don't want to feel superstitious about things. And as soon as so this property, it's a park, but then there's also a graveyard next to it. So the hike trail that I was on, I kind of came to this crossroad section where it's like you can either go to the left to the graveyard or you can take another trail. Well, as soon as I thought that in my heart and was like, I really don't want to feel this superstition anymore. Like, as soon as I walked through that kind of crossroad, to my right was a black cat. And I was like, there's no. So ever since then, I'm just like, yeah, there's no coincidences. Like,
there are some concerning things about, like, if you take the Bigfoot phenomenon and look at like things like Marian apparitions or angelic visits. There's a lot of what I call oppositeness to the Bigfoot phenomenon. the odor of sanctity. Smells, smells like roses. This beautiful smell. What does Bigfoot smell like? Not good.
Death.
People say, especially with Marian apparitions, it was so bright, but I could look right at it. And then Bigfoot, it's blacker than black. It's blacker than the night. What do these apparitions leave behind? Showers of rose petals? What does Bigfoot leave behind? Scat. Nasty hair,
Yeah.
There's a lot of oppositeness to it that makes me wonder. So I think there's a whole ecosystem of spirits out there, good, bad, and everything in between. And, people are like, oh, do you think Bigfoot's a demon? No, I don't. But I do think it could lean towards that negative side, right? I think a demon is like way, it's the way is as negative as you can get. And I think a Bigfoot is a piss poor shape for a demon to take, because if a demon wants to mess me up, just take the shape of a beautiful woman and I'm done. Like you can get me to do anything. But a Bigfoot, come on, Bigfoot's not going to make me, fall off the wagon. So I think I really don't. I don't think Bigfoot's a demon. I don't think Greys are demon. But could they be more negative? Yeah, I think they could. They could. And it's if you believe. If you are a believer, it's worth just making sure you're okay, protecting yourself and trusting your gut and whatever spiritual practices. I always like to point to like the gray alien thing. People can stop it. They can stop these things with prayer and with religious symbols, but it doesn't seem to matter what religion it is. So there's something about belief to this, and so it doesn't matter. I'm Catholic, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't.
That's interesting.
I'm not trying to say I have the right way. What I'm trying to say is like there is an element of spiritualness and belief to it, and people have success no matter their religion. With repelling this stuff. So, but it seems to it's important to have that kind of if you are that kind of person, a spiritual, to have that kind of like solid base to go back to, or that touchstone, whatever it is. But yeah, I do not think we're in most cases messing with demons. I think they can be on the darker side, but I don't think demons.
Yeah, it's always, I don't know, it's fascinating. The more that I kind of dig into all this stuff, and the more people that I talk to, it's just wild. Like I realize now that there is it's more, we live in such a spiritual world. And these things they're out there and people are experiencing them for sure.
Yeah. And the purpose might just be to tap us on the shoulder and let us know, hey, there's something more.
Yeah.
There's something more. There's more than just whatever solid things in front of you.
Yeah. It definitely makes it more interesting. That's for sure.
Oh yeah. 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 It's highly addictive.
Yeah. So do you have any other, I'm going to have to get Crystal, if we can get a date together to go out there. Like I never really thought of it before, but the more that I dig into it, I really want to.
You want a tour guide? I could take you.
Oh, that would be awesome. Yeah.
And
Toad Road.
How far you go depends on your comfort with trespassing. So.
Okay. I don't know. Well, I'm sure it's fine. We were, like I said, we were digging around Hex Hollow and nobody seemed to. Well, we were startled with the amount of no trespassing signs. Like that was definitely. We were like, I don't know if we were like more scared of that than any sort of energy that might be there.
Yeah, the house itself, like you can't even spend too much time around there, they'll just cops will be there. It's just I tell people, stop by, take your pictures, and go right away. Otherwise, the cops are going to be there. That's exactly
what we did.
Yeah.
We just, by the time we found it, we were like, okay, this is great. Let's go to the Amish market. Like. Well, thank you so much. Did you have any other stories you wanted to share?
Oh, I've got stories upon stories, but
I know.
It's I've kind of lost my place as to the appropriate ones where they'll fit in. But I'm happy to come back sometime.
I would love that. Yeah, for sure. Well, why don't you tell people how? Oh, and I also wanted to just say I really enjoyed the Flower Path too.
Oh, thank you.
So you have another podcast.
It's on hiatus right now, but yeah.
I really have just been enjoying those. And I listen to them when I'm hiking, and it's just been really, I never really get a chance to spend time like learning about the saints and things like that. So
yeah, I'm planning I'm hoping to bring it back. I need to catch up. I had to put on pause so I could finish the Hermit book. It just wasn't getting done. There's only so much I can do. And I've got some other irons in the fire right now that I really have to take care of. But I'm hoping to bring it back with a major series that'll be probably a 10 or 12 part series.
Oh, cool.
So, and then it might be like that. I might just do seasons the way kind of other podcasts do. So, but I don't know when that's going to be. It's taking a lot of research. I'm determined to read every book I can on this particular thing I want to do. And I have this probably a whole bookshelf full of books just on this one thing alone.
Oh, wow.
Because I don't want to miss anything. I want to do an incredibly deep dive on it. And it was a series of events that happened over the course of like 4 or 5 years. And I just want to document day by day, if I can, what happened,
cool.
and just do it. So it's going to be a while, but it will come back. But for now, there's a few dozen episodes, I think.
Oh yeah, it's awesome. I definitely highly recommend that too. So thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Like I said, we're super big fans. So
thanks.
did you want to tell everybody how they can find you, and maybe like you've got a lot of cool stuff going on with your the Monsters of March. Your art is amazing. I love it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of Monstrous March, which is doing a monster drawing every day of the months for March. I did Squatchtober in October, and I had so much fun doing that. I figured I'd do March. I might do something in July or something, or August. We'll see. Have to spread it out. I can't.
Yeah.
Let's take some time.
It's beautiful artwork.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, that's. I was an illustrator before I was a writer, so that's kind of. I love everything I do, but that's kind of like the first love. The illustrations in I've Never Minded the Loneliness, by the way, are I think my favorite I've done for any of my books. I was just really like put my heart into that. So the Monstrous March is happening. I've got a book signing in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania for I've Never Minded the Loneliness it's called House of
Oddities.
House of Oddities. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes,
I think
Jeremiah
Crystal
Crow's,
and I are going to try to go to that.
Jeremiah Crow's House of Oddities. This is a really cool, like, dime museum kind of place. That's on the 26th of April, Saturday the 26th. That's a Saturday, right? I have to check my calendar here.
I think so.
Yes. Yep.
I'll put it in the show notes too.
Yep. And everything else you can find at strangefamiliars.com. That's the link to my main podcast, Strange Familiars, but you can find links to get my books and everything else right there. That's all me. All that information goes to me.
Awesome. Well, thanks again so much. And yeah, I'd love to have you back on for sure. And if we ever make it out to Toad Road, I'll definitely hit you up.
Let me know.
Yeah.
I love being a tour guide for that stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And guys, just remember that the truth is out there. God is with you, and everyone always ends up in the kitchen. You have been listening to Sasquatch and Sourdough. I'm Christina, and thank you so much for tuning in. Sasquatch and Sourdough is so much more than just a podcast. We're a community of kindred spirits, united by our curiosity and fascination with the extraordinary. And we want to bring you into the conversation. So whether you've had a brush with the unexplainable, seen something that you can't quite wrap your head around, this is your space. We invite you to join us as we break bread and break down the barriers between the known and the unknown. If you want to share your story, you can email us at sasquatchandsourdough@gmail.com or send us a DM on Instagram. Until next time, remember, the truth is out there, God is with you, and everyone always ends up in the kitchen.